What if the person who dug the hole had come to steal Grandma Judy's body or do something horrible? Laura Lee hated the thought of the hole, the stairs, and the passageway so close to Grandma Judy. What can I do? She thought to herself. In a moment, she answered herself. I think there's really only one thing to do, she said. I've got to go down there and find out what happened. Hold on just a minute, said her first conscience. Have you ever had that happen? Where it feels like you have two consciences? I've had that happen too. Well, her first conscience said, Laura Lee, hold on a minute. Your dad will be home in a couple of hours. You could just ask him to look at it. It'll be dark by then, said the second voice. Who knows what the person who dug the hole might have done by then? I have to do something now. Go get Pete, said the first voice. He could do it. No, said the second voice. He'll just tease me and call me a scaredy cat for not doing it myself. I'm going down there myself. Right now. And so she did. One step after another, little Laura Lee crept down the dirt steps and reached the bottom of the hole. She looked around nervously, then slowly moved toward the open passageway. Was she scared? Oh, absolutely. But what choice did she have? She couldn't let them steal Grandma Judy away, so nervously, step by step, she moved into the passageway, little by little. Inside, the place felt strange. The passageway seemed to be lit by little sparkling stones stuck into the walls every few feet. So even though it was dark and damp, as you might expect, there was enough light to see the floor. Rocks and tree roots stuck out into the passage here and there, but it was still a pretty clear path. The air smelled musty, like dirt and mildew, but also strangely sweet, and the passage was quite long. Laura Lee thought it was a bit odd that it didn't seem to run into any caskets as it dug through the dirt. In fact, though the entrance was near Grandma Judy's grave, the passage seemed to go right under it and continue through the cemetery. It turned in all sorts of angles, and Laura Lee just slowly made her way through it, winding this way and that, wondering what this strange tunnel was all about. Suddenly, as she turned a corner, she bumped right into something. Or was it someone? She let out a scared yelp and jumped back, ready to run. Hold it right there. Hold it there, came an old man's voice. Who's that? Laura Lee froze in place and looked up at the person who spoke. It was an old man, thin and wiry, wearing dirty overalls, with a full white beard and mustache, and a little straw hat on his head. In the light he looked very pale, but his eyes were kind as he looked at Laura Lee. Well now, he said after a moment, it's a little girl. I didn't know we were having anyone new down here today. How do you do, miss? Fine, thanks, stuttered Laura Lee. What's your name? Asked the old man, placing his hands on his hips. I'm Laura Lee, the girl answered. Well, I'm very pleased to meet you, Laura Lee, the man said. My name is Rusty McMaster. Remembering the tombstone she saw when she passed by on her way to Grandma Judy's grave, Laura Lee whispered, "Oh, until later, old rascal." The old man heard her whisper and chuckled. That's right, that's me. Glad to meet you. Laura Lee started, but aren't you dead? At this, the old man seemed to understand that something was wrong. Oh dear, he said. If you don't know that, it must mean that you aren't dead. No, I don't think so, Laura Lee responded. Rusty McMaster looked at the girl carefully before answering, well, bless my soul, indeed you aren't. He shook his head and let out a little sigh. Oh dear. Now this is a tricky situation, isn't it, my little friend? Just how did you get in here? Well, there was just a big hole in the ground with some stairs and Oh dear, I see, Rusty said with a chuckle, cutting her off. And there was this passage at the bottom of those stairs and you came down and here you are. Is that how it was? Yes, Laura Lee answered. Rusty chuckled again and sighed. That, he said, would be the work of Miss Judy. That good lady always leaves the door open whenever she goes out for a visit. I guess she went out and left the door wide open. Despite the strange situation, Laura Lee was happy to hear this detail. That's my Grandma Judy, she exclaimed. She always left the door open when she went out to visit. Rusty McMaster gave a hearty laugh and said, well, some things never change. Darlin', we're gonna have to get you back up there to the world of the living. See, this here is the place of the dead folks. This is where we hang our hats and. Who is that over there, Mr. McMaster? Came a voice from behind the old man. A pale, but elegant-looking woman in a fancy dress stepped up behind him in the passageway. This here is little Miss Laura Lee, answered the old man. It looks like Judy left the door open, and this girl found her way down here into our place. Gracious, said the woman. What a terrible mix-up. Well, we can fix that. I can take her back up there right away. I'm sorry, Ma. I just wondered, said Laura Lee. Please, said the woman, you can call me Priscilla. My name is Priscilla Edmonds and I'm pleased to meet you, Laura Lee. Oh yes, thank you, Miss Priscilla, said Laura Lee. I just wondered. You all said my grandma stays down here with you all? Do you know her? Judy, answered Priscilla. We surely do. Such a warm and lovely lady, we just love her. Well, Laura Lee said, I guess I'm not supposed to be here. I guess you all are the dead folks of the cemetery, and I'm not supposed to be down here with you, it was just a mistake. But, I just wondered. If my grandma stays here, can I see her please? The old man and the woman exchanged skeptical looks, and then old Rusty shrugged. We're not supposed to do that, Priscilla said with a smile, but very well. The problem is, she's gone out. In fact, I'm sure that's why she left the door open. She went to visit a relative in another cemetery. Oh, said Laura Lee, disappointed that her grandmother wasn't home, if you can call a cemetery home. No need to worry, dear, said Priscilla. Tell you what we'll do. I'm sure she'll be back very soon. I'll give you a tour of the place while you wait. How does that sound? Sure, said Laura Lee. She never imagined receiving a tour of the underside of the cemetery. Rusty McMaster tipped his hat and wished Laura Lee a good day as she followed Priscilla down the passageway. Together they explored amazing things that Laura Lee never could have imagined. Rooms began to branch off the passage in every direction. There was a room for playing board games, another for reading books, and a kitchen and dining room. There was even a room with a cozy fire and another for knitting and sewing. One room was great for sports. Laura Lee couldn't believe it. How was all of this possible? Best of all, there was a room just for talking. In this room, like all the others, many of the dearly departed were gathered, having a wonderful time. They looked just as they did the day they had died, only they were pale. Pale, but oh, so happy. In this talking room, Priscilla sat down with Laura Lee, and they were having a nice chat when suddenly a familiar little figure appeared in the doorway. Tears rolled down the pale cheeks of stout little Grandma Judy as she hurried over to where her granddaughter sat. Bless my soul, she cried. Oh, my dear little Laura Lee, is that really you, sweetheart? It's me, Grandma, Laura Lee called back, and the two embraced. I got in through the hole you left open, she added with a giggle. Grandma Judy laughed as they pulled back from their hug. Oh, I know, my dear, don't you worry. They gave me an earful about that when I got in just now. I've got to do better than leaving the door open like that. It's very much against the rules, you know. But I'm so glad to see you, dear Priscilla, you darling soul. Thank you so much for entertaining my little granddaughter. Priscilla smiled. My pleasure, she said. But be sure to keep this quick. We're breaking the rules, you know, and she gracefully left the room. Grandma Judy sat down beside Laura Lee and straightened her apron. Now then, my dear, she said, you must tell me everything. Are you loving school? Laura Lee frowned. Not really, she replied. Oh, said Grandma Judy, why ever not? Laura Lee sighed. Grandma, I'm not very smart. My granddaughter, not very smart. Oh, that's a tall tale. Of course you are, dear. Laura Lee shook her head and looked down. No, not really. My math grades aren't very good, and I don't have very many friends. Now, at this point, most people would immediately defend a loved one. But Grandma Judy, as she always did, knew when listening was more important. So she folded her hands in her lap and said simply, Go on, Laura Lee, honey. Grandma, Bethany is everyone's favorite. The other girls all want to be just like her. Nobody wants to be my friend or be like me, and she has everything. She's so grown up, Grandma. The other girls say she's having changes, and that they're changing, too. They tease me for being just me, for not changing, I guess. I just feel really alone, Grandma. I miss you so much. I don't want to change. I don't want anything to change. I just want to be good at math and have more friends. Grandma Judy didn't say anything for a moment. The two of them just sat in silence, while the sound of chatting from other souls around the big room continued. After a while, Grandma Judy lifted her gentle, wrinkled hand and took Laura Lee's hand. Sweetie, she said, can you remind me of something? Which one was your favorite chocolate chip cookies, sugar cookies, or brownies? Laura Lee smiled and gave Grandma a sideways look. Grandma, you know I love all three of those the same. I could never pick a favorite. Don't you remember? Grandma Judy smiled back. Of course I remember. What did you always tell me about them? Why didn't you have a favorite? Because they all tasted delicious, of course. Sometimes I wanted frosting, but sometimes I wanted chocolate, and sometimes I wanted lots of chocolate. They both chuckled, and Grandma Judy said, "Yes, that's right. And you know, just like how all three of those treats are equally good, all little girls are worth the same." 2. Nobody really gets to be the favorite. Did you know that no girl's better than any other? Bethany isn't better than any other girl. She gets better grades, Laura Lee replied. And she's better because she's changing and growing up and has more friends. Grandma Judy put her arm around Laura Lee's shoulder and pulled her close. "My dear child," she said, "your old granny never went to school. I didn't learn my times tables until I taught myself when I was a grown woman. And speaking of becoming a grown woman, do you know what I found out? I remember becoming a woman and not being a little girl anymore. And you know, I wasn't any better as a woman than I was as a girl. Sweetie, every girl goes through that change in her own time. And you will too, and it won't matter when. Because your heart will be just as good then as it is now. Becoming a woman doesn't change who you are. Sweetheart, it doesn't make you any better than you already are. And you're already one of the best." Tears were welling up in Laura Lee's eyes because, even though her stubborn heart didn't want to believe Grandma Judy, she knew the old woman's words were wise and true. She could feel the emotion in her throat as she asked, "But why don't I have friends, Grandma? How come I always feel so alone?" "Honey," the old lady replied, "we're never alone." "I am," said Laura Lee, as a tear rolled down her cheek. Grandma Judy smiled. "No, dear," she said. "In fact, do you know who I was visiting just now?" Laura Lee shook her head. "My sweet Laura Lee," Grandma Judy said. "That's how our lives are. Sometimes we think we're alone, but we never really are. You as dead folks think about the living all the time, and nobody knows it. And even the living, you all think about each other all the time, and nobody knows that either. What if this Bethany is thinking all the time about how jealous she is of Laura Lee? If she was thinking that, but never said anything, how would you ever know? Sweetie, people think about you much more than you realize. And it's not just about being thought about or how many friends you have. When you're doing the right thing and your heart is good, people will know, and you'll have everything you could ever need. Because it's not over once you grow up, my dear. There are so many things to know and do, and so much to learn as a grown-up. Did you know that? So do right, have a good heart, and people will know. When you're doing that, you'll make it through life, and you'll have the friends you need, honey. I promise." The kind old woman wiped a tear from the girl's cheek and gave her a gentle squeeze. "I remember coming here, my dear. When I died and came here, it was hard. But I did it. I got through my trials, and so can you. You just have to be brave. Don't worry about math, honey, or anything about that Bethany girl. Take it from an old dead lady. Life's too short to worry about those things. There's so much more waiting for you than you know, okay?" Laura Lee swallowed hard and nodded. Even from the grave, Grandma Judy knew exactly what to say. Laura Lee thought about her words over and over as they talked some more. After a few minutes, Priscilla poked her head into the room and smiled at them. Grandma Judy saw her, nodded, and stood up. She walked with Laura Lee, and they talked as they made their way back through the long passage, retracing Laura Lee's steps. When they reached the end, Grandma Judy opened the hole in the ground, and the stairway appeared again, just like before. It was dark outside now, and Laura Lee knew her father would be home soon. She hugged Grandma Judy one last time, tears in her eyes, and then skipped up the stairs. As she reached the top, she turned to see Grandma Judy's proud smile, and then the hole disappeared. Laura Lee hurried back home. It was strange. She was the same girl who had gone into that hole, but she was also different. She would never be the same again. As she neared Tully Street, she looked up at the night sky. She still had her math to do, and she would still see Bethany the next day. But as she walked, she smiled. She could do it now. She could do it all now.